We've covered various kinds of prayers. The first one was hidden prayer, and that was the story of Abraham. And the second one was silent prayer, the story of Hannah, where she went to the temple to pray to God silently, asking for a child, and God blessed her with Samuel and many more children. And we've seen the third one, desperate prayer, which tells us the story of Jonah. Desperate prayers that those prayers we make when we find ourselves in a pickle of our own doing. And then the last one we did was bold prayers. This was a story of Elijah with the 450 prophets of Baal and how God responded to Elijah's bold prayer by sending down fire upon the altar, proving and showing undeniably that he is the one true God. Today we'll talk about the fifth kind of prayer, and our attention will be shifted to persistent prayer. Persistent prayer. Right. So, like I've mentioned already, we will be focusing on persistent prayer today. Um, Persistent prayer. Now, I just want to start by sharing a short story about myself. There was a time in my life when when I first got into college, and I was an international student in Florida. I came from Nigeria to Florida, and I was studying to become a medical doctor. I was a pre-med student, and I was doing pretty well in with my education. And I was in my first semester as a junior. So I was a first semester junior. That is, I had a year and a semester left to finish my pre-med program, and from there, go on to medical school. And during this time, I fell into uh, some financial hardship, and I was financially strained, and I was praying to God to deliver me from this situation, to help me with this situation. I will find myself several times uh, under the under the base of the staircase with my Bible open, with a notebook open, praying to God, crying to God, and asking Him to just turn my story around. What I was asking God was for Him to supply my financial need, to rain down cash, basically, to take care of my financial need. But many times, God doesn't respond the way we want Him to. He usually respond in the way that meets that fulfill His will in our lives. And I was persistent and I was consistent in asking God to help me deal with this situation. So I prayed for several weeks and several months. Eventually, I had to leave the program. I had to leave the school because I didn't have the finances. So God didn't answer the prayer exactly how I wanted it. But after several weeks and several months of praying to God and spending time in His Word, asking Him to change my situation, He changed my heart. He touched my heart in such a powerful way that that moment was a turning point in my life. And one thing that one thing that I learned from that moment in my life was that whenever I fall into hard times, whenever I find myself in tough situations, if I can find a reason to smile, if I can find a reason to be happy in such situation, that shows that victory is at hand. Whenever I can find joy or happiness, even in the midst of what is going on around me, my victory is assured. I realized that God will take care of me no matter what I encounter. That was one of the toughest moments in my life. And if I could go through that moment and I could survive that moment, God can do anything for me and God can meet my needs. Not necessarily my wants, but He can meet my needs. So, what is persistent prayer? Persistent prayer is not about repeating empty words or trying to manipulate God into answering our prayers. Persistent prayer is not us trying to twist God's arms to get what we want. It's about faith that refuses to quit. This is the kind of prayer that doesn't stop knocking, even when the door seems shut. And that is what persistent prayer is. Jesus told a parable in Luke chapter 18 about a widow who kept pleading her case before a judge. This judge didn't care about justice or righteousness. But this woman continued to go to him to plead her case. She had no power, no influence, no wealth. But what she had was persistence. She held her ground. She kept coming until the judge gave in. So in the book of Luke chapter 18 verse 1, it says, "Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up." So it says the reason why Jesus was telling his disciples this parable was to show that they should always pray and they should not give up. Jesus sets the stage that persistent prayer is a sign of faith that endures. When you persist in prayer, when you hold your ground in prayer, when you continue to pray and you're not giving up on that desire of your heart, and you're going to God constantly, consistently, it shows that you have faith that endures. This is the kind of prayer that perseveres. This is the kind of prayer that tarries. A prayer you make when your situation must change. A prayer you make when enough is enough on your condition. That is persistent prayer. The prayer of this widow was a cry that wouldn't stop. She wouldn't stop for no reason until she gets what she wants. Her prayer was consistent. She didn't change her request, and she didn't give up when she didn't get an answer right away. And if we go to verse 3 of Luke 18, it says, Luke chapter 18 verse 3, "And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him," that is the judge, "with the plea, 'Grant me justice against my adversary.'" That was a prayer. That was a plea. That was what she constantly and consistently go to the judge to plead. The same thing over and over again. Her prayer was consistent, or her plea to the judge was consistent. She wasn't tired. So persistent prayer is not about finding the perfect words. It's about coming back again and again and again. Verses 4 and 5 of Luke 18 says, "For some time he, the judge, refused, but finally he said to himself, 'Even though I don't fear God or care about what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so that she won't eventually come and attack me.'" So the judge responded to this widow that was consistently coming to him to make one plea. And the judge was responding to her not because he cares about her, not because he fears God, but because he's afraid that if this woman doesn't get a request, I'm afraid she will attack me. So basically, the judge was doing this for self-preservation rather than for justice. But even an unjust judge responded to persistence. How much more will God, who is righteous and loving? And the point Jesus was trying to make here was that you have to keep, it's not that you have to keep raining down prayer on God. No, that's not what Jesus Christ was saying. It doesn't mean that you should start bombarding the gates of heaven with prayer. That's not what he was talking about. Because sometimes we feel like God doesn't hear us, as if God doesn't care for us. Jesus Christ was pointing this out to show us more about how God is willing to answer your prayers. He is a righteous God. He's a loving God. He's a God that cares so much for you. He is willing to answer your prayers. God answers persistent prayers. But when you see this, I don't want you to see it as persistent prayer. I want you to see it as persistent faith, because that's what keeps you coming. That's what will keep you coming over and over again to God, because your faith endures, your faith persists. So Jesus makes it clear. God is not like the unjust judge. God is eager to answer his people who call him day and night. When we go to Luke chapter 18, verses 7 to 8, it says, "And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly." So Jesus said God is a good judge. He's just, and he will not put off answering the prayers of his people. You will see that they get justice and that they get it quickly. Jesus was pointing out that if an unrighteous judge responds to persistence, how much more will a faithful God respond? Because again, the persistence of our faith means, or the persistence of our prayer means, that our faith is also persistent. So what are the lessons that we can learn from this story of persistent faith? What are some lessons that we can learn from the story of this widow who will not let this judge rest until she gets justice? The first lesson can be found in Luke chapter 11, verse 9 to 10. Luke chapter 11, verse 9 to 10. It says, "Ask and it will be given. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you." It shows that persistent prayer is about asking, seeking, and knocking, not just once, but until the answer comes. And granted, the answer may not be what we want, but it will surely be what we need. I'm reminded of the story of Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul says that several times I went to God, I went to the Lord and asked him to take this thorn away from my flesh. Apostle Paul had a thorn that was in his flesh, and he asked God to take this thorn away. He said several times I went to God. That is, he was persistent. He was consistent. He was asking about the same thing. Take this thorn away from my flesh. But he didn't get the answer he wanted. The thorn was not taken away from his flesh. What God told him was that my grace is sufficient for you. God told Apostle Paul that. And Apostle Paul was discerning enough to realize that although that was not the answer I wanted, but that was the answer he needed. He needed to know that he can rely on the strength, on the grace of God, regardless of the thorn in his flesh. And Apostle Paul says that now I can go and do what God has called me to do, regardless of the thorn in my flesh, because I know that his grace is sufficient for my need. And when I am weak, then I am strong, not because of Apostle Paul's power, but because of the grace of God that will strengthen him, even though he's dealing with the thorn in his flesh. So persistent prayer is about asking, seeking, and knocking, not just once, but until the answer comes. The second thing that you can learn from this lesson, from this story, is in Luke chapter 18, verse 8. It says, "However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth?" That's Jesus Christ asking. After Jesus Christ has shared this story about this widow with a persistent prayer, which Jesus Christ was trying to get the disciples to understand that this persistent prayer is a show that your faith is persistent, that your faith endures. He now finished it by asking, "However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth?" True persistence is a sign of faith. The real question isn't whether God will answer, it's whether we'll keep believing until he does. And make no mistake about it, the answer may not always be what you want, but what you need. At that moment in my life, when I was expecting God to rain down cash to take care of my financial need. That was not what happened. What happened was my faith was strengthened. And like I said, that was a turning point in my life. Nothing phases me anymore, because at that moment in time, I thought my life was over. But if my life was not over then, it shows me that there's more for me in this life. And God, who took care of me through that situation, can take care of me right in this moment. Whenever I'm facing any challenges, I can trust God. The challenge for you today is this. Have you ever felt like giving up on a prayer because it seems like nothing is happening? Jesus said that you have to keep praying and not lose heart, because God's delays are not denials. Sometimes persistence is part of the process. Persistence is part of the process that fine-tunes your faith, that strengthens your faith. So what is one prayer that you've been waiting on God to answer? What is that one prayer? This week, as we look forward to the resurrection, as we look forward to celebrating Easter, as Easter draws nearer, I want you to commit to knocking on those doors. Continue to ask, keep asking, keep believing, don't give up. Because persistent prayers lead to powerful breakthrough. And see, in persistent prayer, what you gain by persisting in prayer, what you gain by persisting in your faith will not only be for that moment, it will carry you through your life. Apostle Paul got the response that my grace is sufficient for you, not just for that moment, but also for the future. So persistent prayer is about persistent faith. It shows that you have a faith that endures. And when you persist in prayer, God works on your heart. God works on your heart so that the desires of your heart lines up with his will. And your faith is strengthened. So this is the message today on persistent prayer. I hope you've learned something. I will encourage you to follow me on my socials and like and comment, and I welcome your feedbacks as well. If you have any question, don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you very much for joining me today on God Talk 360. My name is Paul Ige Adeyanju. Until next time, have a blessed day.